What is China quietly doing inside America's most vulnerable systems? And is it all part of a long-term plan?
We need to tell people to stop drinking the tap water now. We're seeing contamination cases coming in.
The United States is facing its most daunting challenge since the nation was created.
They're inside our system today, right now.
For China to be the hegemon, all democracies will have to have been subordinated, either by choice or by force.
There's a lot more potential harm they could do.
I grew up inside a system that controls everything. Now, I'm starting to wonder if it followed me here.
超限战的第一条规则就是没有规则。
Excuse me, when will my medication be available?
The FBI addressing 2 new cases from China a day, 1 every 12 hours.
最大化一切。
我们的命令是使他们的系统过载。
Switch to the backup system.
It seems it doesn't work. The neighbors just said the whole country has gone dark.
What if this isn't just a nightmare scenario, but a calculated strategy already unfolding against us? I grew up in China, but where the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, controls everything. What we say, what we read, what we fear. A place where the system can make people vanish overnight. A journalist, a teacher, a friend who says the wrong thing. I left that behind for a land that promised freedom. Or at least, I thought it did. I'm David Zhang. I spent years investigating the Chinese Communist Party, not from Beijing, but from here in America. My audience has grown to over 1.5 million people who want to understand how China's system of control works. I never imagined that their system could reach our American domain. Recently, a China expert reached out. He told me China's infiltration already touches every single American and that without action, they could overthrow us from within. It seemed unbelievable. I decided to check out what the regular American thinks. Have you ever heard of anything about Chinese infiltration to the US?
I have not.
I don't feel like China has the power to be able to infiltrate that much.
We're very open for people doing whatever they want to do. I don't personally feel concerned because I live in the state of Idaho.
It was strange. None of them really seemed alarmed, but I couldn't shake what the expert had told me. I had to find out what's really going on. So, I want to go straight to the source, the expert who had reached out to me, Professor Tianliang Zhang. He's one of the world's foremost experts on the Chinese Communist Party, with over 2 decades of research, best-selling books, and over 700,000 subscribers on YouTube. During our meeting, he pointed to a critical figure, Wang Huning, a member of the CCP's Politburo Standing Committee, the group of just 7 men who hold the highest power in China.
He's actually the mastermind behind 3 generations of CCP leaders.
Really?
Yeah, he has been plotting against America for decades. He came here like 40 years ago. In 1989, he observed this society and he felt that he had found the weakness of America. Cultural decay, breakdown of shared values, and also the internal division.
So all the things happening right now.
Right, so not only that, but the problem is he feels like this is something he can make use of. So he wrote a book in 1989. It is called America Against America.
Oh, wow, that's a big title.
And now he has developed this philosophy into a very systematic scheme, and he set it in motion. American people are not aware of it. It's right like the night before September 11, and they still feel like they are living in a peaceful world. I know you are a great China analyst, and I think that you can be a great investigator. And I will open the door for you to some insiders, so that you know what they're really plotting on, and whether it is too late for us to react.
America against America. It reminds me of two Chinese military colonels who in 1999 pushed the idea even further in their book, Unrestricted Warfare. In their view, the battlefield has shifted. Wars were no longer just fought with armies, but across every domain. Side by side, they seem to map a terrifying blueprint. The chief strategist of the CCP diagnosed America's weaknesses. The colonels laid out how those very weaknesses could be weaponized in a war without limits. To me, that looks like strategy. I have seen the brutality of the CCP. I don't want that to ever reach America. We can't fight back unless we understand who we're up against. They won't stop until they have total control. And if they ever reach that point, freedom as we know it is gone. So I need to find the truth. Is this strategy already unfolding inside America? Because if it is, exposing it may be our only chance. It didn't take long to find a very disturbing pattern. Recently, researchers uncovered hundreds of Chinese academic papers that were detailing how to probe and exploit weak points of America's real power grid. Also, it seems that many of our Chinese-made devices arrive with hidden backdoors.
Cybersecurity experts in the United States are warning of Chinese-made solar panels containing hidden communication devices.
Also embedded in them are hidden kill switches, which are capable of circumventing firewalls and remotely shutting down our power grids. This doesn't feel like a coincidence. So I reached out to Bill Gertz, a veteran national security reporter who has been tracking the CCP's hidden hand for decades.
The Chinese Communist Party is waging a new Cold War, and the U.S. is only beginning to wake up to it. What the Chinese cyber forces have done is infiltrate our critical infrastructure, such as our electric grids, our water supply, our financial networks, our transportation networks. And what that means is that if there were a crisis or a conflict, that China would be able to attack our critical infrastructure and shut down our entire system.
If they can plant backdoors in our grid, the question is, where else have they built access? I need to see how deep this pattern really runs. Much of our critical infrastructure depends on Chinese manufactured components. By outpricing American alternatives, China effectively made their products the default choice. But was this just economics at play? Or was it part of a calculated strategy?
We're here at the port of Newark, which is actually the largest port on the east coast of the United States. And behind me, you see these towering port cranes. Most of these cranes are made by a Chinese company called ZPMC.
And this company has extensive ties to the Chinese Communist Party and its military-industrial operations. Ports and the ability to move goods are a nation's lifeline. But if China controls key parts of that system, what does that really mean for America? Few understand this better than Captain James Fennell, a former US Navy intelligence officer who spent nearly 30 years tracking Beijing's rise at sea.
Cranes do have the capability to be manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party back in the mainland through various techniques and methods. So it is a real threat, and it's something that can actually impact the lifeblood of America, which is the ability to move and have goods and services coming out. Some of our port facilities are co-located with U.S. naval installations. As they are able to hear maybe embedded traffic communications or data supply streams, they're going to be able to learn a little bit more about how our military works, how our civil defense works in the United States. They knowing where those systems are and those supply chains run. In this case, we will want to disrupt from getting a certain type of food or a certain kind of medical supply that they need.
Are you still out of insulin?
I'm so sorry.
It sounds very devious, but this is what they call their comprehensive national power.
And it has cameras, It can tell you like how many weapons you ship to which area. I think there are a lot of things you can dig out by analyzing the data.
说到数量，查查上个月美国给台湾运了多少武器。
No wonder that in February 2024, the US administration announced a plan to invest more than $20 billion over 5 years in replacing cranes built outside the United States. It's hard to grasp just how much our lives now depend on Chinese technology. But what if that dependency isn't by coincidence, but by design? Before becoming the CCP's chief strategist, Wang Huning was a scholar at Fudan University, where he wrote America Against America. In it, he observed that in America, it's not the people who master technology, it's technology that masters the people. What if that was more than just an observation? The colonels who wrote Unrestricted Warfare went even further, stating that technology can be weaponized. Looking at what's happening today, I wonder if that doctrine is already being executed. What began as ideology has become infrastructure. They're not only watching our power grids and ports, the networks that keep America running are the same ones that connect our personal devices. If China can see into those systems, what's truly at stake?
So I've come to America's capital, Washington, D.C., to understand what is it that the CCP is setting their sights on in America's highest offices.
I turned to Professor Nicholas F. de Miades, with over 3 decades in U.S. intelligence at the CIA and DIA.
I say this to the FBI, you're addressing 2 new cases from China a day, 1 every 12 hours. Many of them take months to resolve. We document China's cyber attacks in critical infrastructure. We document China's putting backdoors in apps so that they can get access into phones and into computers, documented like crazy. I mean, all this stuff is that. Some of my cases are made up of things like this. Next step, what happens from there? It's a losing strategy. For the last 20-something years, we've been fighting a war on terrorism. China has seen this and actually said that this was an era of strategic opportunity. We have ignored China from a counterintelligence perspective, from an economic security perspective, from a political security, right, influence perspective. We basically ignored China. We're just now waking up. And the question is, on everyone's mind, is it too late?
New details on a massive hack first discovered months ago targeting American cell phones.
It's being called one of the biggest hacks in U.S. history, potentially affecting more than 1 million Americans.
You see, U.S. intelligence confirmed that this Cell Typhoon, which is a Chinese state-sponsored hacking group with close ties to the Ministry of Security, had breached multiple U.S. telecom networks like AT&T and Verizon. What they had done was target high-profile individuals, gathering information on things like call logs, text messages, as well as audio data. They target elites across the political spectrum. The question is why? Is it to see their views on U.S. policy or even their perspectives on the world order?
Trump, Vance, and even Kamala Harris, their phones were tapped. But even metadata collection reveals some important information. Who you call, how long you talk, where you made a phone call. So all these things can reveal your social connections. And by observing how long a call lasts, they know who is more important to you. And they can approach this person, right?
Madam Secretary, I apologize for the intrusion, but this cannot wait.
We tend to think of hacking as something done from the outside, someone breaking in. But what if, in many cases, the door is actually already open?
Beijing could use the app to spy on Americans. TikTok has 170 million American users.
It feels like China's access to that much information has to be about leverage. And that raises a bigger question. What do they plan to do with it? Anna Masolia is an investigative reporter who has spent years investigating dark money and foreign influence in America.
In particular, in recent years, American industries and companies and individuals have become increasingly reliant on Chinese technology without fully understanding all of the risks that could be involved. It could be used to identify individuals who are more vulnerable to that propaganda. We don't know how that data is being used. But the stakes are even higher if it is a government official or politician who might have access to sensitive information or could be targeted in a very specific way.
At the individual level, data harvesting can result in identity theft, opening accounts, committing fraud, or impersonating you. But it doesn't stop there. In 2022, investigative reporter Emily Baker White revealed that TikTok's parent company had tracked her movements through the app while she was covering the company.
So they were pulling my IP address for my TikTok account in order to try to figure out a vague approximation of my location.
他的消息来源是谁?
And both my device and the source's device pinged from the same IP address. They would know who was talking to me.
They seem to have many ways of listening. Japan's prime minister covered that a Chinese state-backed group hijacked more than 16,000 TP-Link routers. These same routers also sit inside our American homes, our offices, our businesses. According to a report, 65% of American households and small businesses depend on routers from TP-Link. If these systems are compromised, how many of us are already being quietly monitored? And how hard would it be for them to reach into our computers and take our ideas, our inventions, our work? Just a few years after writing America Against America, Wang Huning caught the eye of then top leader Jiang Zemin and was pulled into Beijing's inner sanctum. His mission was to turn ideas into doctrine, and doctrine into strategy. Interestingly, in his book, he had argued that if the Americans are to be overtaken, one thing must be done: surpass them in science and technology. How far has that vision been carried out, and how deeply has it affected us?
They have a program that they call National Rejuvenation. It's actually to place China as the central power over the entire world. They're also trying to steal our technology and use that against us so that their companies could be more competitive. So they're working very diligently to focus on how to weaken the United States.
After digging into the numbers, I found that $400 billion a year, that's what China's tech theft has been costing us. 2 million American jobs gone. Lost patents, lost innovation. The pattern doesn't end with corporations. It also extends into universities and research labs across America. More than 277,000 Chinese nationals study here today. Behind some of those exchanges is the 1,000 Talents program, a Chinese government-run initiative aimed at recruiting top scientists. Could this be the next front in China's campaign for global dominance? Take the case of Ruopeng Liu. He studied at Duke, worked on Pentagon-funded stealth research, and later became a billionaire in China. Duke accused him of secretly photographing the invisibility cloak equipment and reproducing it back home. The FBI opened an investigation, and it's still unresolved. It turns even worse when Americans themselves are compromised.
Federal officials say Charles Lieber signed a contract with Wuhan University of Technology.
He was indicted on charges of making false statements to federal authorities.
Going through files and documents, it became clear to me the Lieber case was just one chapter in a much larger story. For years, China appears to have leveraged academic partnerships, research grants, and honorary programs to quietly recruit foreign talent and gain access to advanced US research. Now, how does all this fit into the CCP's grand strategy? When Wang entered Beijing's inner circle, he redefined the role of academia. To him, whoever controls innovation controls the world. That thinking paved the way for state-backed programs to copy, acquire, or recruit foreign expertise. All part of one mission: to close the knowledge gap with the West by any means necessary. Unrestricted warfare made that idea explicit. Open societies and academic exchange could be turned into weapons. Could the American universities be this blind to what's happening?
We do have a lot of academics and even leading business officials which provide the same information that they're getting from universities, that they're getting while they're on university payrolls, to China. It's just not illegal. The university could potentially take some action against it, but they usually don't because they're getting a big check from China. We wind up with an extraordinary drain in our knowledge base, and sometimes that has military applications.
As I've looked at how deeply Chinese scholars are involved in American research collaborations, I can't help but wonder, is a place like Stanford just a campus or also a target? Beijing's China Scholarship Council funds thousands of students abroad, some reportedly bound by contracts to report their progress back home. The focus areas: AI, biotech, quantum science, technologies that will shape the next century.
All right, we're here at Stanford University, and this is where a person hosted by the name of Charles Chen approached many experts, females studying China. He was offering them free trips to China, asking them about details, which, by the way, they've never disclosed publicly before.
You are conducting important research on China, right?
Yes, how did you know?
It would be easy for you to become famous in China.
What shocks me most is that many of the approached students avoid talking about it. There are two likely reasons. First, fear. No one wants to be labeled a racist. And second, money. More than $64 million in Chinese funding from secret donors. How can all of this be allowed to play out?
What you see is what we call a whole-of-society approach. China gets well past its own intelligence services, the Ministry of State Security and the PLA. They tell society, you are responsible for providing us intelligence. If we ask you, you've got to give it to us, and you can't be deceptive, and you must pass this over to us.
要是你不替我们偷过来，你在中国的亲人就会有麻烦。
So, like it or not, wherever you are in China or worldwide, if you have a company, if you're in a state-owned enterprise, the Chinese government can call on you to give them information, and they do. They wind up turning their whole society into a collection mechanism.
You're here later than the cleaning crew.
Just running late-night tests.
If the person gets caught, well, China doesn't care. You know, China's sitting behind a wall and just throwing out money.
What Eftimiades describes is more than espionage. It's a system. If that's the mindset driving China's rise, how does this system actually work, and what happens when the technology they acquired from us is turned back against us? To help me understand that, I turn to Richard Fisher, a senior fellow who has spent decades studying China's military expansion and the ideology behind it.
China has this military divisions of students that it has deployed that are controlled by embassies or consulates.
保持团结，祖国永远是你们最坚强的后盾。
在这里，你们不仅是学生，你们是祖国的代表。
That can be ordered to commit espionage, to participate in political actions, or, if necessary, to conduct terrorist military actions.
Reports expose Chinese-linked shell companies buying a trailer park right next to a major U.S. nuclear bomber base. The connections were hidden until investigators uncovered CCP was behind. But that's not all. Mr. Fisher also warned about other types of military actions.
可以的。
We need to tell people, stop drinking the tap water immediately. You say thousands of people have become sick, but everything here says our water is fine.
This sounds like a movie plot, but security experts warn it's all too possible. China is actively developing marine-based biotoxins and testing how AI can make them even harder to detect and easier to deploy. What's worse, even young and seemingly innocent students are used to carry out these types of plans.
Justice Department has charged 2 Chinese nationals with smuggling into the U.S. of fungus that officials say could be used as a biological weapon.
The feds arrest a 3rd Chinese national for allegedly smuggling biological materials into the United States and making false statements about it.
DOJ reports now confirm it. The Chinese students pleaded guilty to smuggling a crop-killing fungus that could have devastated American agriculture if it hadn't been caught. I find it hard to wrap my head around. Students acting as extensions of a foreign government. Not every student is complicit, of course, that's clear. But how much influence does the party truly have? And how does the CCP execute these tasks from within the United States? Infiltration isn't improvised, it's orchestrated. So what's the playbook here? To get an insider's perspective on how this system truly operates and how it affects us, I sat down with Jennifer Zhang, a veteran journalist who once worked within one of China's top government think tanks.
United Front was regarded as one of the 3 magic weapons that helped the CCP to gain their power. It just means to work with anybody, even somebody within your enemy. So they use this kind of tactics actually to infiltrate.
Elmi, why did you ask for this meeting? Our values could not be more different.
Well, interests can align. In the end, we do share some common goals of power, don't we?
There are always people, politicians, who can be bought over with money. They are corrupting the society from within.
The theory is you join with other organizations and sway them and pull them into supporting the objectives of the Chinese Communist Party.
Whether it's on college campuses, whether it's in corporate boardrooms, whether it's in professional associations, whether it's in think tanks in Washington, D.C., or whether it's even in some of our government institutions.
So you effectively have nonprofit organizations willing to work for China at the direction of the United Front Work Department. Last my count was 770-something of those associations in the United States.
And finally, a sincere thank you to our generous sponsor, Mr. Liu, and the Harmony Asia Foundation.
A Washington think tank analyzed more than 160 CCP budget reports and found that in 2019 alone, Beijing spent at least $1.4 billion on United Front operations. According to Anna Masolia, these groups can look like ordinary community organizations, for example.
Money could be funneled through different levels of nonprofits. It could appear to be a community page. It could appear to be the environment or some other cause. The very sophisticated operation where people who are running the very public-facing nonprofit at the end may not even be aware of the full extent that their operation is funded or shaped or influenced by CCP-linked actors and entities.
Listening to this, a question of scale emerges. If influence can move this quietly through civil society, where does it ultimately lead? When Wang Huning studied America, he wrote that the powerful groups that dominate politics are above the common people. Inside Beijing's top policy circles, he helped shape Jiang Zemin's 3 represents, shifting the party toward courting China's own elites. It also modernized the United Front work, turning it from a Mao-era tactic into a global influence platform aimed at elites abroad. How does the CCP seek to influence smart, educated, and seemingly independent people in politics, media, and business? I feel genuinely worried, realizing that so many of these unrestricted warfare tactics have been unfolding right before our eyes for too long. How do we not see it? There must have been people, probably many, who allowed it. This was beyond what I could piece together alone. I needed the professor's help.
I think we need to talk to people with inside information. One is Professor Yuan Hongbin. He used to work in Peking University, a very famous law professor. The other person is called Mr. Cai Shenkun, who was a very famous commentator. One is in Taiwan now, and one is in California.
All right, I'm here in Taipei, Silicon Valley. I'm about to go speak with Professor Yuan Hongbing. Before he was exiled from China, he was one of China's top legal scholars. And unfortunately, when he sided with students at Tiananmen Square in 1989, he left China. And before he didn't leave empty-handed. He actually maintained extensive connections there.
Among them are high-level insiders within the CCP system. Since he used to go out drinking with Xi Jinping, I just had to ask him about that. In your view, from when you met him until now, has Xi Jinping's thinking ever changed?
When I first met Xi Jinping back in the late 1980s, he was a local official in Xiamen. Every time he came to Beijing, he would find me, always bringing 2 bottles of Maotai. When he wasn't drinking, he seemed cautious, restrained, almost shy. But after a few glasses, his true nature came out, ambitious, assertive, even domineering. Deep down, his conviction mirrored what's written in the Communist Manifesto, the belief that the Communist Party must one day claim ownership over the entire world.
While listening, something strikes me. Xi Jinping speaks of a shared future of humanity. It sounds idealistic, but I wonder how differently such a vision might look once it is put into practice. Could you summarize the CCP's overall strategy towards America?
The goal is to replace the United States as the world's lawmaker and to rewrite the global order in its own image. The CCP targets officials, business leaders, actors, journalists, and influencers, anyone who can shape opinion, using weaknesses such as vanity, greed, sexual desire in order to manipulate them. One of my former classmates, Meng Hongwei, served as Minister of Public Security in China. He used to train women on how to wage information warfare overseas, including how to manipulate and control foreign media.
I tell you, I find your insights on this paper quite brilliant.
One method they use is bribery, using money and sex to buy off media professionals. The targets are reporters, editors, and the entire media staff.
They say you can tell a lot about a man by how he handles the quiet.
Its penetration of the American media is naturally a top priority.
Join us for the top stories and more.
The top stories and more.
Could you give us some examples on how the CCP uses media to control America?
Before the CCP's 20th Congress in 2022, Xi Jinping convened a meeting of the party's Political and Legal Affairs Commission. The theme of this meeting was to discuss a new phase of the CCP's campaign against Falun Gong abroad. They concluded that direct propaganda against Falun Gong wasn't working. So Xi approved a new strategy, a comprehensive infiltration of American mainstream media.
Why does the CCP single out and target Falun Gong in particular?
In the struggle for freedom, rule of law, and human rights in the 21st century, one of the most touching chapters is the peaceful resistance of Falun Gong practitioners against the CCP's tyranny. To the CCP, this resistance is a deadly threat to its political rule. They fear the truth. That's why leader after leader within the CCP have mobilized the full power of the state to crush it. A central task is to target the founder of Falun Gong. Then, using mainstream media as their proxy voices, to attack Falun Gong under the guise of Western journalism. By 2024, their groundwork was largely complete, paving the way for legal and media warfare in America.
My talk with Yuan Hongbing was eye-opening. But what stayed with me was the unease. According to him, Xi Jinping is not moving toward reform, but back toward Maoist absolutism, with ambitions extending beyond China's borders. I feel that Taiwan shows what China could have become: free, open, full of light. But that light endures only because America still stands behind it. Back across the ocean, I can feel our own freedoms trembling. If that resolve falters, that light will fade everywhere. What does that mean for America's future? Returning to the US, I turn to Sarah Cook, a senior researcher who spent years tracking Chinese propaganda networks. I want to understand, how did the CCP learn to bend the world's information systems, including ours, to its will?
A project I worked at Freedom House looked at Beijing's global media influence. And we actually found that the US was facing a very high level of media influence efforts. And I think what was striking was just the sheer breadth of those tactics and efforts. It's not only propaganda or censorship or disinformation campaigns or national media or local media, it's all of it. Sometimes it's very direct. Sometimes we know that there's a Chinese ambassador that picked up the phone or made a personal visit to an executive and asked them to suppress certain content or certain stories. But in other cases, you end up with media executives or editors who see the corporations, the media companies' own economic interests being potentially put at risk. And then they, of their own initiative, without even being contacted directly by China, put pressure on journalists not to publish certain information.
In recent years, in particular, CCP operations have gone online. Influencers on online media and on what appear to be news media in many cases. It's very easy to create your own persona online. There is a variety of issues that tend to be more polarizing within the United States, and Chinese propaganda oftentimes will pick up on those and really amplify them.
It's only now been revealed that the vast disinformation campaign is tied to the Chinese government.
It's the biggest disinformation campaign the world's ever seen.
Though that's only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more, in particular with TikTok. Influencers are posting positive messaging about China with no disclaimers at all.
The Chinese Communist Party is deploying algorithmic manipulation to impact users' beliefs and behaviors on a massive scale.
China has a very dynamic foreign influence operation targeting the U.S. with such a wide range of different vehicles that are used in order to shape public opinion in the minds of Americans, where we are seeing spending on newspapers, on newspaper ads in American publications.
The New York Times made more than $100,000 a month from this garbage. Those payments were not disclosed at the time. They were hidden from New York Times readers.
Oftentimes, it's not that you're seeing content that's either incorrect or framed in a certain way. It's oftentimes whether or not they even cover a certain topic. And I think that that's a really important thing as well.
A clear example of this kind of subtle censorship is the story of former New York Times journalist Didi Kirsten Tatlow. Now, according to her testimony, she was censored by her own employer after stumbling upon a sensitive and politically charged topic. It began when she was in China investigating the medical system. But what began as routine reporting quickly raised suspicions of forced organ harvesting. When she attempted to broaden her investigation, she was told that it was French. A state-sponsored defamation campaign was launched against her. She received warnings from China's foreign ministry, and even more troubling, her own newspaper heavily edited her article. She suspected that these stories had cost her any future promotions, so Didi left the New York Times in 2017. Okay, I need to piece this all together. When I step back and look at everything together, a structure starts to emerge. First, control the narrative, silence critics, then marching through the institutions, and finally, turn that access into leverage, weaken the system it's targeting, not through one attack, but through pressure, layer by layer. Back to Wang Huning, who argued that America's greatest vulnerability lies in free speech, openness, and mass media. His rise placed him at the core of the party's ideological machine. In 2022, he shared the National Conference of Propaganda Ministers, calling for stronger foreign propaganda and positive publicity. In Unrestricted Warfare, the colonels describe media as a battlefield. The goal is to destroy the enemy's will to resist. For me, their aim becomes clear. If they can control what Americans think about the CCP, they can also weaken our defenses. And that's why groups like Falun Gong, which expose the Chinese regime's worst abuses, pose such a direct threat to their carefully crafted image. Maybe that's why discrediting Falun Gong has been such a priority for Beijing, especially as their platforms, like the dance company Shenyun, reach audiences worldwide. Still, I find it perplexing. How could a government feel so threatened by a dance performance?
So in China's eyes, in the leadership's eyes, that's a threat. For doing, performances, that's negative against communist control. But we have seen a very, very aggressive campaign from China, including threatened bombings to close down facilities, for events, things like that.
A threat today against the company forced an evacuation of the building.
Attacks on tour buses, like slashing bus tires, and other forms of harassment by CCP actors on American soil.
So they want to take Shenyun down because Shenyun presented something that challenged the legitimacy of CCP.
Is this what Yuan Hongming warned about when he talked about the CCP embedding itself inside US media and using the US legal system against their enemies?
The New York Times has for nearly 6 months been preparing a hit piece against Shenyun Performing Arts.
I got a tip on my X account, and he told me, check out the father of the reporter who wrote these articles, because he is the overseas honorable director of a very important CCP United Front work organization. And I found tons of information about his deep relationship with the CCP.
So I started digging into some of the New York Times articles, and after reading them, something stood out to me. Many of the interview subjects discrediting Falun Gong seems to have direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party.
So take this case of a former dancer with Shen Yun. After leaving the troupe, she actually spoke highly of the company and stayed in touch with her teacher from the Shen Yun school.
But then suddenly, she did a complete 180. Of course, I can't say why she did. All I know is this.
Over time, she became increasingly connected to the Beijing Dance Academy, a school that appears tightly controlled by the CCP. Nearly half its budget comes from the party, and 10 of its 11 top leaders are CCP members linked to United Front networks. Maybe it's coincidence, but the New York Times chose sources closely tied to that very academy when attacking Shen Yun. And this academy also appears to be involved in other influence efforts. For nearly 20 years, Shen Yun Performing Arts collaborated with the SUNY Purchase Theater, but after Beijing Dance Academy established a partnership with the same venue, the theater abruptly ended Shen Yun's contract. And then this dancer, who is tied to the Beijing Dance Academy, started using a familiar CCP tactic. She suddenly began filing lawsuits against her former teacher, the school she once praised, even the founder of Falun Gong. And this tactic is exactly what Professor Yuan Hongbing described to us.
They are using the US legal system to use very expensive lawsuit or process to burden the dissidents that they don't like.
The CCP and its affiliated entities are using American courts and courts in like-minded democracies to silence critics and fight its opponents.
In 5 out of the 30 countries that we looked at, we did see examples of lawsuits, especially defamation suits, being filed against people who are critical of the Chinese government, or especially in cases where there was some kind of expose related to a Chinese company that was tying it back to the CCP. In most of the cases, there wasn't real ground for it, and the cases ended up being thrown out or just basically being dropped in the end. But in the process, where this dragged on for several years, you have 2 dimensions that come. One is that it really increases the cost for who is ever being critical. 2, it can discredit them and raise questions about their own credibility of whether this reporting or this expose that they did was actually truthful.
The Chinese Communist Party is clearly learning how to bend the US systems meant to protect free speech. When the rules of a democracy become the weapons of a dictatorship, the question isn't just who's targeted next. It's whether the system itself can hold.
We had a case in New York not long ago, last year. They tried to bribe an IRS official.
John Chen tried to get the IRS to do the CCP's bidding and repress a US nonprofit it wants to bring down.
Actually, that IRS official turned out to be an FBI agent. And so they got caught and they got convicted.
While reviewing the DOJ's case files, one photograph caught my attention. John Chen, an agent with multiple identities, seen shaking hands with Xi Jinping. His attempted IRS bribe had one purpose: to frame Shen Yun Performing Arts.
So I think a lot of times people see, oh, the Chinese Communist Party is targeting the dissidents. Maybe that doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of us. But actually, when you look at the way the Chinese Communist Party operates, those are the first targets, and then the mechanisms, the apparatus, the tactics that they use and refine there, before you know it, start expanding to other targets, including ones that are maybe more mainstream to, say, American society or another democracy.
We followed the pattern. Dissidents crushed, media narratives twisted, institutions turned inwards. This feels like the ultimate realization of America against America. When Americans themselves are turned against truth-tellers, that doctrine feels frighteningly alive. The colonels in Unrestricted Warfare actually laid out how psychological operations work. Their aim is not just to deceive the enemy, but to fracture it from within. This brings us to our next topic. In Congress, Representative Eric Swalwell's connection to a Chinese operative named Fang Feng revealed exactly the kind of honey trap influence campaign Yuan Hongbin described. And years before that, Senator Dianne Feinstein unknowingly employed a Chinese intelligence asset as her driver. For decades, the CCP has studied how power moves through American politics, where it's built and where it's bought. Jin San-rong, a leading CCP alliance scholar, even said it out loud.
We in the Chinese government hope that in the end, every U.S. congressman's district will have Chinese investment, and China will be able to control several thousand votes, and then we can influence his attitude. If China conducts good operations in the U.S., we may be able to buy it over and turn the U.S. into our second standing committee of the National People's Congress.
During his speech, Mr. Jin referred to "we in the Chinese government." Was he revealing official strategy or simply speaking as a scholar? Professor Tian Liang pointed me to another insider, Cai Shenkung, in California. He's a political writer and commentator with a record of unusually accurate predictions about factional struggles inside the CCP.
The Chinese Communist Party's policy toward the U.S. has always been consistent. It's not decided on a whim by any leader. From Mao Zedong to Deng Xiaoping to Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao and now Xi Jinping, they have always seen the United States as the imagined enemy. Both political parties in the U.S. must recognize the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party. When it comes to military power, every buildup, every new weapon system have been directly aimed at the U.S., not at any other country.
I just had to ask, is the CCP preparing a war against America?
The CCP isn't yet ready to launch a so-called hot war. But that doesn't mean there aren't proxy wars already happening. For example, Hamas' surprise attack on Israel. Behind it, you can hear echoes of the CCP. That's beyond doubt. The same with the war in Ukraine. Without China's support, it likely couldn't have lasted this long. Through these kinds of proxy conflicts, Beijing diverts America's attention, keeping the U.S. busy and too distracted and exhausted to confront the CCP directly.
The picture became clearer during a meeting with EU officials when China's foreign ministry stated that it does not want to see Russia lose the war against Ukraine. That confession echoes a line straight out of Unrestricted Warfare. The colonels described it as killing with a borrowed knife, weakening an enemy through a third party.
The Chinese Communist Party has basically already lined up with the enemies of Israel and is actually funding and supporting Iran, the main source of support for 3 proxy terrorist organizations that are at war with Israel.
As we looked at the tactics of proxy wars abroad, I was reminded of another front, one right here beneath our feet. I'd heard about the controversies surrounding foreign farmland purchases before, but the deeper I dug, the more unmistakable it felt. This isn't random investment. This is strategy. As unrestricted warfare puts it, whoever controls the flow of resources controls the lifeline of nations. According to the USDA, China-linked companies now own almost 280,000 acres of U.S. farmland. The U.S. Air Force has already called it a significant threat to national security.
This is Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota, home of some of the nation's most sensitive technology. And this property sits just about 20 minutes down the road.
The Department of Defense should probably have a veto power over whether or not we allow commerce from China to come into America, so that we don't have Chinese corporations being built right next to our military installations and stealing our secrets or preparing themselves to neutralize our military in the state of a conflict.
Control, this is Sierra 26. I have 2 unauthorized inbound contacts at 040, requesting engagement protocols.
Unrestricted warfare sometimes looks like business as usual. Wang Huning warned that America's prosperity rests on consumerism, a system vulnerable if its manufacturing base is hollowed out and jobs vanish overseas. The colonels in Unrestricted Warfare wrote, "In the future, financial weapons will be among the most important weapons of war. In their vision, nothing is off limits. Entrapping countries in debt, trade wars, controlling key industries, currency manipulation, and even globalization itself. How much of the world around us has already been shaped by these tactics?"
87% of the counterfeit products that come into the United States come from China. And that is a $1.77 trillion a year business. More than twice, almost 3 times the global drug trade. That translates to American jobs, getting inferior products in, on airplanes, on cars. The World Health Organization says over 1 million people die annually from fake drugs. So can the Chinese government clamp down on these things? Absolutely. Do they choose to? Absolutely not. Because this is a means of unrestricted warfare. And that's what we face on a massive scale.
The stakes for the U.S. are enormous. The Made in China 2025 plan is the first of 3 10-year programs that are intended to build China into the world's dominant industrial power and therefore the world's dominant power.
So Xi Jinping was very explicit that China will take over all the manufacturing capabilities from the world in 2025. So now we can see that they almost achieved their goals. 40% of manufacturing capabilities are in China now, and they can only consume 15% of the products. It creates deficit, from other countries, and then basically destroyed their manufacturers.
Dozens of workers are out of a job at a manufacturing plant in Trumbull County.
Pepsi is shutting down its manufacturing facility on Mack Avenue in Detroit.
It's a strategy that spans industries, from basic manufacturing to the highest level of innovation. And nowhere is that more clear than in the story of Boeing and China's state-backed competitor, Comac.
But if the C919 looks a lot like its Boeing and Airbus competitors, that's by design.
The Chinese Communist Party is ordering competitors in China to obtain the foreign economic technology by any means possible in order to create products that put the foreign company out of business. This is a key tool for the Chinese Communist Party's pursuit of global hegemony.
Today we are announcing an indictment against 5 officers of the Chinese People's Liberation Army for serious cybersecurity breaches against 6 American victim companies.
Unit 61398 of the PLA, through cyber activities, stole the processing techniques for steel production. And then China turned and, with government subsidies, flooded the U.S. with steel, hoping to collapse the industry.
A United Steelworkers spokesperson tells us Cleveland Cliffs Mill in Conshohocken will have its status changed from idle to closed.
Jobs lost, industries hollowed out. That's just one of the many tactics used by the CCP to weaken America.
We can now see the strategy stretching from Beijing's inner circle to state-backed corporations, all pushing America into dependence on the CCP. Over just 10 years, US reliance on Chinese electronics surged 600%. And today, nearly 40% of the chips inside American weapons come from China. And the more we argue about who's responsible for our economic problems, the easier it becomes for the CCP to operate in the shadows. Because of decades of CCP-driven policies, America's middle class has collapsed from 61% in 1971 to just 40% today. Economists estimate 4 to 5 million US jobs were lost in the process. When the middle class collapses, families fall into poverty, and a nation's stability starts to crack. Even worse, the CCP haven't just been taking our jobs, they've been taking American lives.
Fentanyl poisoning is now the leading cause of death in the United States for people under the age of 45.
Congressman Richie Torres saying up to 97% of the chemicals needed for fentanyl are coming directly from China.
Okay, we've arrived in the sunny and beautiful Tampa Bay area of Florida. Here, unfortunately, in 2025, the DEA says that they seized 177 million lethal dose of fentanyl.
Every link in the chain, from the chemical plants in China to the border seizures in Mexico, seems to point to a system that has been operating with precision, not coincidence. I put that question to Steve Yates, a veteran national security official who spent decades decoding the CCP and tracking its fentanyl networks.
I see fentanyl as a chemical weapons attack on America. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that fentanyl is an America problem, not a China problem, even though China very much knows that they are manufacturing and exporting the precursors.
And there was a congressional report last year that said that the Chinese government was actually providing tax breaks to some of these companies.
Each year, the number of Americans killed by fentanyl has been twice the death toll during the entire Vietnam War. It's hard to believe that a government capable of crushing dissent so efficiently hasn't been able to stop the flow of fentanyl precursors. Yet, instead of shutting these companies down, Beijing was even giving some of them tax breaks. To me, that says everything. These Chinese chemical firms have been making the ingredients and then shipping them to Mexico.
It was a drug deal. Here they are sipping coffee in the lobby of a fancy hotel in Fiji in 2023, hoping to secure a huge sale.
According to US government assessments, Chinese brokers and chemists have helped cartels convert those chemicals into fentanyl pressed into pills designed to look legitimate. And here's what's striking. The DEA reports that precursors can cost less than a cent per deadly dose. But once turned into pills, they have been sold for enormous profits in the US.
Cartels are like a sovereign entity unto themselves, where they make a lot of money that then needs to be laundered. And in recent years, PRC entities took over a lot of the money laundering for the cartels.
Previously, Beijing insisted that America's fentanyl crisis was purely America's problem. But it should be noted that China has now officially agreed to list key precursors and commit to a plan to stop their flow. It does make you wonder what changed and why these measures are suddenly possible now. This isn't the first time. Back in 2018, Xi Jinping agreed to ban these precursors from being shipped to the United States. And they did, but the chemicals simply started flowing to Mexico instead, and then into the US from there. So history reminds us that trust must be verified.
In October of 2023, I got a call from an emergency room asking me to help identify my daughter. I was told that it was an overdose, and I was told quickly that it was fentanyl related. It was the fentanyl that cut off, that seized her lungs, cut off oxygen, and that was what dealt the fatal blow to her brain. I had been advocating for tougher measures against China on fentanyl for years, and it's their actions that directly contribute to the death of my daughter that is a very, very bitter pill for me to swallow.
Reading all the facts and hearing all the stories, bringing the pieces together has been harder than I imagined. To realize that Wang Huning once wrote about how drugs could weaken America, and to see that the CCP's military thinkers later classified drug warfare as a legitimate tactic is deeply disturbing. And it makes me heavy-hearted that we have not done more to stop their advance. Perhaps one reason we haven't fully woken up is that we simply cannot believe such evil exists. So calculated, so utterly devoid of empathy carried out by those willing to do anything for power.
They look at themselves as being below the United States, and it's intolerable.
Including hypersonic missiles that could threaten U.S. ships.
Why does China do what it does? They say it themselves. By 2049, they wish to be the preeminent power on the planet. The only problem with that is the means that they seek to do it, which are generally more like criminal acts.
American is, of course, the leader of the free world. It's the beacon, That's why CCP always consider America its biggest enemy. A free society anywhere is a threat to CCP.
This threat will not be diminished with traditional deterrence. It's a much deeper threat, and it has to be waged on the ideological level.
In essence, the Chinese Communist Party approach to the whole world is like mustard gas on the World War I battlefield. It infiltrates, penetrates every possible opening, and it just does its evil work.
After comparing the evidence with America against America and unrestricted warfare, one conclusion emerges. According to these sources, the CCP strategy is deliberate. When I step back and look at it all together, it feels like an attack coming from every direction. Politically, interference in elections and surveillance of our lawmakers. Economically, pushing dependence, dumping cheap products, and hollowing out our middle class. Militarily, infiltrating infrastructure, buying land near bases, embedding chips in our weapons. Socially, monitoring us, flooding the country with fentanyl, and shaping narratives through media and legal warfare. None of this appears random. Taken together, the pieces suggest a broader pattern. It reflects a sustained, coordinated campaign conducted across multiple fronts. A campaign that corrodes truth and undermines those who seek to expose it. Where persuasion fails, deception becomes the tool. Where inspiration falls short, influence takes its place. Yet light is stronger than the shadows it reveals. And that light begins with you.
If I was going to give a message to the American public, it would be that this is not going away. And defense doesn't work. There's no incentive in place for China to stop any of this behavior. A strategy can't be just the FBI or the Defense Department. It's got to be everybody. Without our own whole of society approach, and that means state governments, local governments, critical infrastructure, without those people understanding and responding to this, we're going to have a different type of country in the next 10 or 15 years, a type of country you probably won't want to raise your kids in.
Vetting organizations and companies that you rely on for investments is very important. If you are looking at a video on TikTok or YouTube, making sure that you understand that even if there is not a disclaimer, there could be an agenda behind it.
I think that by any measure, that if someone is recognized as an adversary, their status as living in this country and sharing the benefits of freedom and democracy in this country, at the same time being connected to a hostile foreign power, in this case the Chinese Communist Party, that you could make an argument that they should be removed from the country.
So the real question is, what are we going to do about it? Because this isn't someone else's problem anymore. This is here. This is now. And whether you're a parent, a policymaker, a teacher, or a CEO, what happens next depends on you.
Every one of us have the power to act. For example, we can delete Chinese apps, replace Chinese-made tech, routers, Phones, computers, EVs. Pay attention to politicians or media figures who praise the CCP. Report suspicious foreign influence to the FBI. Protect our supply chains. Defend American intellectual property. Block CCP-linked lawfare and intimidation. Teach the reality of communism early, clearly, and honestly. And rebuild our own industrial strength. This is how a free society defends itself.
Well, first and foremost, the average American can pay attention to their elected leaders. Are they aware of the overall threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party? Are they talking about it?
The threat that we face from the Communist Party of China today is one like no other. And we need to wake up to that and push back in ways that save America, but really save the world and perhaps ultimately the people of China.
The threat we face is like no other. We need to wake up. It concerns everybody. Before we lose our hope and liberty, it's time we take it back. It's up to you and me. Turn in the tide, a beacon of light, save America. We cross the night as our missions align. Save America. When you feel the truth, you'll fight with lies. They wrap the world in friendly ties, but every gift demands a price. What we do next decides if our freedom survives. Is our nation asleep with an enemy inside? Turn in the tide, a beacon of light, save America. We cross the night as our missions align. Save America. I grew up in China, where the state controlled what I thought of, what I said, and my dreams dissolved.